Welcome to Pace of the City. Mike Pace is my name, and I seem to have a knack for interviewing strong, independent, dynamic women, and today's guest is no exception. She grew up in Newton, Iowa, one of 8 children of a single mom. She has a husband and 3 children of her own. She is manager of human resources for Tone Spices, which is a division of B&G Foods, national company. But in spite of being busy with that family and that full-time job, she somehow managed to found the Atwood Center and run it today, a resource center for women. She is Gina Skinner-Thebo. Welcome, nice to have you with us.
Thanks, good to be here.
And you describe yourself as open, transparent, loud, and messy. Now, what do you mean by that?
I mean that I can't help but be myself no matter who I'm around. So it's served me well in most situations, but I am who I am. I'm not afraid of it, and actually I embrace it. And that's one of my missions, is to get more women to be transparent about what's really going on with them.
That sounds like cutting edge stuff in the 21st century with what's happening with the world today and women in the world today.
Yeah, and social media, of course, plays a role in that. You know, we paint the perfect picture of what we want the world to see, but it's not actually what's going on, so.
Well, now, one of 8 children, and you describe yourself as maybe not exactly carbon copies of the other 7. But
looks-wise, I am. So there are 7 girls and 1 boy, and yeah, looks-wise, we're identical, blonde hair and blue eyes. But yeah, I was definitely the black sheep of the family. I was number 7 of 8, and I didn't fall in line as my other siblings did. They were well-behaved, super smart, rule followers, and I really struggled with that growing up. So,
well, now your mom, a single mom working 70 hours a week, 2 or 3, 4 different jobs, whatever it was. That's quite a tempo, quite a fast tempo, and you've kind of maintained that in your life. But talk about some of the things that happened to create or talk about those behavioral issues and how they manifested themselves.
Well, and yeah, I live a very full life, and I definitely got that from my mom. You know, she managed the household, she worked 2 full-time jobs, and all of us were in multiple activities growing up. So we were all sports year-round, played multiple instruments, those types of things. So it was a constantly on-the-go household. But I knew from a very young age that there was something off, that I was, I don't want to say different, but that I was struggling with something that was different than my siblings. And now I can articulate that as depression. But that is very hard to manage and deal with from a young person's perspective, and even as an adult. And that followed me everywhere, clearly. It's not something that you can shake. So it affected a lot of things in my life.
I know you're active with NAMI, National Association of Mental Illness, and we've had Peggy Huppert on this program, and we want to talk about your involvement there and how the Resource Center gets involved with that. But I want to concentrate a little bit more on you for a while here. And so you maintained kind of a high efficiency or a high functioning sort of youth in spite of these moments of depression and behavioral problems.
Yeah. To give a story to that, a neighbor of mine from when I was a little girl contacted me in 2018 and was like, "I'd love to have coffee with you." And she was the mother of a peer of mine, and I hadn't seen her in many, many years. And she sat across from me and said, "You are a miracle. I cannot believe that you turned out to be who you are," because she knew the young Gina, and she saw me struggle and have the severe behavioral issues, be suspended from school, you know, and I was high functioning, so I was performing very well academically. I was a drum major in the band, I was in show choir, I was in soccer and swimming. So, and you hear about now, you know, with high functioning people with mental illness, and it was no different when I was younger, but the behavioral issues got much worse into high school, and that was very clearly reflected in my behavior that people saw, that witnessed.
So you had difficulty sleeping, you had suicidal thoughts?
Oh yeah, for years and years. Yeah. Wow. Self-harm. There was a lot of things behind it, and I mean, suicidal ideation for years and years. We're talking about severe mental illness, and a lot of that was exacerbated by the drugs that I was put on. So this was 20 plus years ago when a lot of the drugs that we use on kids today were just kind of starting to be tested, including Ambien, which is a sleep drug. I'm sure you've heard of that.
Sure.
I was actually taking Ambien over 2 decades ago when it first came out, which
Wow.
is very dangerous for children to take. So,
Well, you know, behavioral problems and mental illness, it's kind of a chicken and the egg conversation that you can
yeah,
have.
absolutely.
You didn't necessarily abuse illicit drugs. It was more
Yeah.
prescription drugs. And in spite of that, we're able to do well enough in school to be to excel and be accepted to college.
Yep.
And it wasn't just drugs and alcohol, like a lot of high school kids.
Right.
They are the sources of a lot of their problems.
Right. Yeah. And you know, I give that a lot of credit to my mom too. She was my biggest advocate. I was such a problem for her. I caused a lot of issues, and she just kept trying. She would take me to one shrink to a different shrink. She would go to the school and argue with the teachers with them about, you know, whether or not what I was doing was malicious, or, and so she just never gave up on me.
How did Newton High School help you, or did they support you well? Were there programs there that helped?
I think that this was, again, a long time ago, before this was really a topic of conversation for a lot of schools. They didn't know what to do with me, and they were just flabbergasted because my siblings before me had been model children.
And you yourself were, again, a high-functioning student, excelling in so many areas.
And I think that was very frustrating to them because they knew the potential I had, and so they were really struggling with that. There were a couple of teachers, especially music teachers, that kind of took me under their wing and really made sure that I was cared for, but it was a struggle. It was a struggle. And I was on a 501(b),
okay,
which is a plan specifically for kids with disabilities and behavioral issues. And so I had some protections under the law, so their hands were tied to a certain extent.
So you're 18 and it's time to think about college.
Yep.
What were your academic interests, and where did you want to go to school, or what were you thinking about then?
You know, I didn't do a lot of planning. I was so absorbed in what was going on to me, just getting through every day. But I loved history. I've always loved history, and I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to teach high school history and be one of those sparks, one of those rays of light that was there for me.
Excellent.
So that's what I ultimately went to college for, but didn't.
And
I
we'll talk
changed
about
course.
the
Yeah.
detour and the change of
Sure.
directions. My guest is Gina Skinner-Thebo, who is founder of the Atwood Center, Resource Center for Women. We're going to get back to more about that and the amazing story, amazing really works, story of how she met her husband. Everybody has a story, but this one is fun, and you'll enjoy that when we come back on Pace of the City. Stay with us. We're back on Pace of the City, and my guest is Gina Skinner-Thebo, who is founder of a women's resource center called the Atwood Center, and she's also a human relations manager. I want to get the title right, with Tone's Spices in Ankeny. But everybody has a story, Gina, about how they met their spouse.
Yep.
I met Abigail in 8th grade. She was 5'9", I was 5'5". She didn't know I was alive until I came back, having grown about 8 inches one year. But your story about how you met your husband, I think, is one of the most fun, unusual stories that I've ever heard. So run that down for us.
Yeah, it's a good one to tell. We were at a summer camp in high school with several thousand students, and we were staying in dorms, and it was in Illinois. And I walked out of the dorm I was staying in, and I was walking to, I think, dinner with some friends, and one of my friends said, "That guy over there is wearing the exact same outfit you're wearing." And I was like, "Where?" And I looked over, and he was wearing a blue Superman shirt and khaki shorts and red Converse Chuck Taylors. And we also used to carry with us stuffed animals we had a gag where we would each carry a stuffed animal around with us everywhere we went, and he
Now,
had a stuffed animal and I had a stuffed animal.
that is just
It's
almost
so weird.
almost freaky weird.
It's so weird. And so we approached him, and my friends were like, hey, do you want to take a picture with this woman and this girl? And I mean, because this was 20 years ago, nobody had cell phones yet or anything. Somebody happened to have a disposable camera on them. And so in the picture, I have it, the original, you can tell he's kind of weirded out, like, what is going on? So yeah, that's the story. We met because we were dressed exactly the same, and we lived in different states, so.
That is just amazing. Good stuff. Now, he was he older than you? He
Yep,
was a year
2
ahead
years.
of you, wasn't he?
2 years, yep.
And you both end up at Park University in Kansas City.
Correct, yep.
And you started out with a history idea, right?
Yep.
What was he studying?
Computer science.
Okay.
Yep.
And he followed in
Yep.
that direction?
He sure did, yep.
So then, how did things change with you in terms of what you were going to study and your major switch? How did that happen, and where did you go with it?
Honestly, it was a professor in college. He kind of dissuaded me from pursuing being a teacher. He told me about there's a lot of politics involved. He's like, I just don't see you thriving in that because you kind of have to play nice and really work with the administration and do a lot of things that you don't necessarily want to do as a teacher, and I think we all know that, right? And so I did really well in accounting, so I actually thought about being an accountant, but then human resources, I took a class and I was like, oh, well, this is interesting, and there's always a job in HR, and I really love people. I love trying to protect people and help them, and so I thought, oh, this is a good fit, so I went with HR.
Well, now, your job with Tone Spices, working with HR, that's a pretty demanding job.
Sure,
That's full-time. Yeah. You have 3 children, 7, 5, and 1,
Yep.
right? And a husband, and an active, busy, crazy life once you leave Tones.
Sure.
How did you manage to find time to do the Atwood Center, and when and how did that all come together?
Well, sometimes you're just compelled to do things. You don't think about how you're going to do them, you just know you have to. And I would say that that is exactly how the Atwood Center started. It was just this moment where I knew that it was time, and my husband actually kind of pushed me. He bought me a website domain on Black Friday of last year of 2017, and he said, Gina, you can't wait anymore. Here's the domain, do what you have to do. And then he took several days of PTO in December with me of last year, and we built the website from scratch. So I had him nudging me along too.
Well, so you came from a mother who worked 70 hours a week. It was not exactly totally foreign for you to put in those kind of
Not
hours
at
to
all.
make this
Yeah.
happen, right?
I'm a busybody. I like to have a lot going on.
High
I'm not
energy.
one to,
You're high
yeah.
energy.
And when I go home at the end of the night, I don't sit down on the couch. I'm on my feet for the rest of the night doing whatever around the house.
Well, with those 3
So-
little ones, you'd have to be.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, we've talked about how demanding all that could be, and I know that family is important to you. You mentioned to me that being a mother might be your greatest calling, in spite of all the success you've had with business and the center. And yet, mom is the big thing that makes your heart beat fast.
Yeah, it actually makes me emotional for even to hear that because it's so true.
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to be a mother since I was a very little girl. I had a baby doll that I would pretend that I was her mother, and I still remember it so clearly. And I've just been really fortunate and blessed to have a partner who wants the same things, and we have a beautiful family. So and we're not done. I hope to maybe, I don't know, mother in other ways too.
I want to talk about Rachel. Rachel was a very close friend and mentor to you, inspirational figure in your life. You were sort of partners involved in things that became the Atwood Center, but talk about her struggles and how her suicide affected you.
Yeah, Rachel was my best friend in college. She was the president of the American Association of University Women, which is a club in college, and I met her, and she recruited me to become part of the organization, and she taught me so much about feminism and what it means to be a good mother. And she and I actually started a nonprofit when we were in college together too, but she taught me so much about advocating for others. And one thing that's ironic now is she was my best friend in college, but I was coming out of the darkness when I knew her.
Your own problems.
I was finally starting to be stable, and so I didn't talk with her about what I had gone through or what I was living with. And so she didn't know that part of my story. I didn't hide it, but I wasn't transparent about it. And so, yeah, she died by suicide in 2014.
Difficult even today, right? We touched on your involvement with NAMI and Peggy Huppert's efforts, and she's a dynamic leader in that area nationally, and we're going to get into how the Atwood Center works with NAMI and how you personally are involved, and how Iowa, frankly, is kind of dragging its feet in terms of our resources for mentally ill people.
We have a lot of work to do.
We have lots of things where we don't measure up too well.
No,
so
yeah.
We'll be back on Pace of the City with Gina Skinner-Thebo to talk about that and much more on Pace of the City. Stay with us. We're back on Pace of the City. My guest is Gina Skinner-Thebo, who is Manager of Human Relations or Human Services with Tones, Spices, and Ankeny. We're talking about the Atwood Center now, which is something that Gina somehow finds time for, even though juggling a family of 4 and a full-time job. Give us an overview of what happens, Gina, at the Atwood Center. And when did this all come together and become officially an entity?
Sure. I actually founded it January 1st of 2018, so we're coming up on our 1 year.
About a 1 year.
Yeah.
Okay.
The main things we do at the Atwood Center, we do incredible women parties. We have the Wear Your Heart on Your Sleeve campaign. I have a blog and podcast. And then I do a weekly spotlight series where I spotlight a woman in the community on my website every Sunday.
Incredible women's parties.
Yep, IWPs.
Well, let's start right there. What happens at these parties and
Sure.
how do you get invited? You have to be a woman, first of all.
You do have to be a woman, yes. Although I'm encouraging
I'm
men.
out of luck.
You can have an incredible men party.
Really?
I think it would be great.
It would be.
So a little over a year ago, I invited 50 of my closest girlfriends to my house for a party.
50.
And I did this because I have a lot of friends who are in different parts of my life who have not intersected, and I wanted them to meet. So I threw this party in my basement, and I thought, how am I going to get these women to actually know each other? Because I wanted all of them to be exposed to one another. So I thought, I'm going to make them each speak for 1 minute about themselves. And so we did this, and it was just a magical night. It was a magical night. And so I knew I needed to keep doing it. And so Incredible Women Parties happen quarterly. We pick a topic, and then every single woman who attends has to speak for 1 minute into a microphone. So every woman has her voice heard. Because I think that's really important. I think that there are people like myself who tend to have a dominant personality, who like to talk, and I wanted to make sure I created a safe space for women who have a tendency to pull back a bit.
I was just going to ask something in that direction because it reminds me of class reunion, small high school, where we had to invite 4 years to draw a crowd out of Norwalk. I'm so old, but we had people who, as we went around the room, took 10 seconds.
Sure.
And some people took 7, 8 minutes, you know, and people are looking at their watch. So everybody's a little different when it comes to speaking in front of anybody.
Yeah, and
right?
we use a timer. We time it. So once the timer goes off, you're done.
You're done.
But I wanted to kind of force women, too, to recognize their worth and to know that their voice matters and what they have to say, people want to hear it. And so we just pick a different topic each time, and it's been fascinating. It's been wonderful, the feedback I've gotten. It always sells out. So I give 50 slots, 50 tickets, and it sells out really quickly.
Oh,
so,
I bet.
Yeah.
You seem to be the type of person who does wear your heart on your sleeve.
Yeah.
And that's another one of the main components. Talk about that.
Sure. So I hand out heart pins. So with my business cards for the Atwood Center, every business card has a heart pin attached. And I ask people to put it somewhere where it will remind them to be transparent and open with others. So again, we're trying to, our society encourages people to be polished, to not talk about the hard stuff. And I want to go in the opposite direction. I want to lay it out there. I want us to be vulnerable with each other. And I think there's nothing more empowering than hearing from another woman who's gone through a struggle that you have, because it reminds you that you can make it, and you can come out even better.
So the third of the 4 would be the Spotlight Series. And talk about that. Where does that happen? How does it come together?
It's pretty easy. It's actually just a template I send to a woman in the community, and she answers a lot of questions. So they all answer the same questions. How do you like to connect with women? What makes your heart race? What organizations are you excited about? And then she provides me with a headshot, and I feature her on my website every Sunday.
Now, do you have women from high, we used to use the silly phrase, high rafter bats, you know, people who are high in society or the community, as well as relatively normal functioning moms who might not be even involved in business?
I've actually gotten some pushback because I've asked a couple of women to be featured, and one's a stay-at-home mom. And she goes, well, I don't think that I'm right for that. And I said, well, why on earth not? You're a woman who, you know, manages 4 children.
Right.
And that's just it. Women need to realize that their voice matters, that their worth matters, and it's not tied to a title or,
and let's hope with the focus that's on women these days in general, allows some of that focus to go to the homemaker.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
It's a huge responsibility.
Oh, I love paying other people to watch my children.
And if husbands and wives can do a better job with that, we're going to have a better,
absolutely,
better country, better world.
Yes.
Yeah. And then your blogs. It's marvelous to me that you would even find time to do a blog, but if I know you're probably doing it at Starbucks or something like this and answering your phone, right?
I write when I feel inspired. So if there's a topic that it's really tugging at my heart, then I'm going to spend time. And then I do my podcast with Sarah at Energy 106.7. So that's, you know, and those are very sporadic. So it's not like every week or every month. It's when I feel compelled, I have a message to send. So.
Sure. Now you have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and I know you've talked about maybe having more children, perhaps adopting.
Yep.
You're already juggling activities,
sure,
which is doing nothing but adding to the load. Am I right?
Yes.
And that's not going to diminish.
No, it won't. I just love it though, and you know, I think people underestimate what they're capable of. I think that they cap themselves, and I'm like, you'd be surprised by how much one person can contribute to the communities that we live in, whether if they're serving on the PTA or they are serving on a board or they're just loving their children really well. There are a lot of ways to contribute. And like I coach my kids' teams, my kids' soccer teams and basketball teams, and I love it because I was in sports.
Yeah,
so
I think the trick is, for someone with such capacity that you have, is juggling it and keeping a balance, because you can almost be a butterfly running from one thing to the other.
Yeah, but if I'm with my family too, like family time starts at 6 p.m. and then I'm with my family from then on out. So if I'm with them at a sporting event, that's great. But just as long as we're doing it together, we're spending time together.
Let's talk about the 21st century woman and our world and the Me Too movement and so on and so forth. I know that that's front of mind to someone like you.
Yep.
What are the challenges that come along with that? I'm thinking, as a man, how do you make sure you don't alienate the male side of the population? Because most of what the Me Too movement is all about is so valid and so important, and yet it's tricky too, because you don't want to turn men off.
Right. You know, I think when Tarana Burke really coined the Me Too movement, she knew how many women were affected by it. And so it's very hard to isolate men, in my opinion, if their eyes are open, because almost every woman I know has been affected by it in one way or another. Of course, it's the severity, you know, varies. But as a survivor myself and as a, you know, active person who really believes in the Me Too movement, it can't help but kind of steer my course because it's a part of my story. And so I think, again, just being open and transparent, and men, I feel like, can be honest and direct with me, and I don't know, it's complicated. My focus is so much on women and empowering them, and that will benefit everybody, men too. So that's a complicated question.
Well, and the concerns that women have with the Me Too movement are genuine and real.
Sure.
There are big problems.
Well, as an HR professional, I promise you they're real.
And you've seen a lot of them personally, I'm sure.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's real, and it needs to be addressed, certainly. If there are women viewers, or men for that matter, who'd like to get involved and learn more about the Atwood Center, we have a number, we have a website, and I know you're working constantly to keep that dynamic and keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best way to get involved is just to attend an Incredible Women Party, so you do have to be a woman.
Oh, start out with a party, why not?
Yeah, but that's the best way to kind of get some exposure to it. And I promise once you attend one, you'll want to come to the rest.
Gina Skinner-Thebo is my guest, and we'll be back with a few curveballs for Gina right after this. Back for our traditional curveballs for Gina Skinner-Thebo. Early mentor.
Ooh. Brett Hall, band teacher in high school.
Perfect.
Life changer.
Hero?
Serena Williams, tennis player.
There you go. I was just going to ask about a global or international hero, and she would be one.
Yeah.
Right. Best advice you ever got from Mom?
Oh, gosh. That your children are everything.
Best advice you ever gave your kids?
Ooh, I'm still working on
They're
that.
pretty young, too. So.
To be generous, to have a generous heart. When you're given a lot, you can give a lot away.
If you hadn't gone the direction you did, working with human services, is there another occupation that you think, if you had another life to live, you could go that way? Would it be teaching? Because I know you thought about that.
I don't know. That's a good question. Teaching is really hard. It is really,
And important.
It's so important. It's such a sacrifice. It's a great question. I'm right where I'm supposed to be.
Boy, that's perfect.
And so I'm not sure.
Good answer. Ever consider running for office?
Yes.
Have you?
Yeah, yes, I've been contacted about, yes, I'll consider it. I'll start with the school board, see where it goes from there.
Well, I have a feeling that that might not be the end of the line for you, politically speaking. Well, thank you very much. And if you're a viewer and you have some interest in the Atwood Center, please do follow up and learn more. My guest is Gina Skinner-Thebo, who is Human Services Manager for Tone Spices, but her passion, of course, is her being a mother and running the Atwood Center. And so we hope you'll get more acquainted with that. And if you have questions, again, follow up and maybe become involved. This is Pace of the City, and now you know more about Gina Skinner-Thebo.